The year is 2018, and the Houston Rockets have the best record in the league, finishing with 65 wins, led by their MVP James Harden, who averaged 30 points, 9 assists, and 5 rebounds a game. The team would meet the Golden State Warriors in the Western Conference Finals, a team that featured the likes of Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, and Kevin Durant. The series would go to 7 games, where the Rockets would have to deal with the loss of Chris Paul and would hit their biggest cold streak of the season, missing 27 straight three-pointers, but somehow still kept the game fairly close and would end up falling just short. This is a crazy scenario to look back at. The Rockets had a real chance at winning that game, a victory that would have put them in a very favorable matchup against the post-Kyrie Irving Cavs. This would have changed a lot of the narratives around the league. James Harden would now have an NBA title on his resume, and it really would have changed the way we look at that Warriors team. Now, just 3 years later, this Rockets team is in a whole new situation. Since then, they would eventually trade Chris Paul for Russell Westbrook, then go trade Russell Westbrook for John Wall. This Rockets team just isn't in a position to compete for a title like it was 3 years ago. Due to this, Rockets superstar James Harden looked at the timer of his career ticking and decided to get off this team in favor of a team with a real title shot by any means possible. The question I want to try to find the best answer to in this video is, did James Harden wear a fat suit, or at the least go out of his way to appear like he had put on more weight to tank his trade value? Now, this isn't going to be a simple question to answer. So I think we really need to go back and look at James Harden's weight throughout his career. He's never really been a player, especially in recent seasons, to have an impressive physique. For years, James Harden's weight has been a headline for both opposite reasons. It seems every year we're either talking about the fact that he's gained a ton of weight or that he's skinnier than ever. Let's just look at some of the most recent James Harden weight stories. Leading up to last season, a video came out of James Harden boxing, where he clearly looked bigger than usual. This caused everyone to go crazy. Even some people thought we were going to see a different James Harden, which obviously wasn't true. Then when the NBA was suspended, a picture of James Harden came out on a hike or something of that nature, where he looked noticeably thinner. So we need to keep in mind that due to James Harden's unique build, his weight has been a conversation for years now. Now, this really all started when James Harden took the court for the start of the season, where this picture was taken. When I first saw this picture, I think most were shocked. At first, I thought Kendrick Perkins had come out of retirement, but no, it was one of the greatest scorers the league had ever seen, supposedly still in his prime. I mean, in this picture, it looked bad. Harden truly didn't look like a professional athlete. Now, this wasn't the only time this season where pregame James Harden looked like he'd been enjoying the all-you-can-eat buffets. More pictures from pregame shoot-arounds came around where he looked, let's say, out of shape. At the time of these pictures coming out, most people didn't really look at them as an effort to get traded as soon as possible, rather a product of how he spent his offseason. Leading up to the year, following his trade request, James Harden had been filmed on several occasions partying in the middle of a pandemic. Some of these instances came just weeks before the start of the NBA season, while his teammates were at training camp preparing for the start of this season. It was clear that Harden had not been putting in a lot of effort into preparing for the upcoming season, especially if that meant he was going to be wearing a Rockets uniform. But when James Harden got traded and took the court pregame for the Brooklyn Nets, the narrative switched on its head. It truly looked like in some of these pictures, he was in as good of shape as ever. This made everyone look at this weight situation more like a 200 IQ play to get traded rather than a product of his offseason. But whether it was intentional or not, I think everyone wanted to know, if our eyes aren't deceiving us, how in the world did James Harden lose what appears to be a matter of 30 or so pounds in a few days? Now, I'm not a medical expert or anything like that, but I have heard of some crazy weight swings in sports, so let's take a look at some of those. An example of extreme weight gain would be Charles Barkley. Leading up into the 1984 NBA draft, Charles Barkley was focused on getting his weight under control, as the Philadelphia 76ers had promised him that they would take him at 5 if he was available, and got his weight under 285 pounds. But Barkley's plans quickly changed when he realized that due to some salary cap changes, if he was going to go to Philly, he would earn just $75,000, not quite the number he was expecting coming out of college. Due to this, he came up with a plan, a pretty simple plan, centered around the fact that if he gained weight, he would make more money. In just 48 hours, he would pack on 20 or so pounds through trips to Denny's, where he would eat massive meals consisting of pancakes, eggs, bacon, sausage, and hash browns, washed down by milkshakes. He would end up weighing in with Philly at 302 pounds, but the funny part of this story is that the 76ers still ended up drafting him. I think some of the best examples of extreme weight loss come from the combat sports, such as boxing and MMA. In the UFC, it's common to see fighters cut anywhere from 5 to 25 pounds in a matter of days leading up to their fight, so that they can weigh in for their weight class. Sometimes these cuts can exceed 30 pounds. Some of the biggest fighters in the sport, such as Anderson Silva, Khabib, and Conor McGregor, have been known for huge differences in their daily walking weight compared to what they weigh in on the scale the night before the fight. A lot of times, some of this is done just through the intense training in the weeks leading up to their fight, but a lot of times these fighters are actively trying to cut huge amounts of weight just hours before stepping on the scale. They do this in a lot of ways, a lot of times pretty dangerously, but for the most part, the main focus is to try to reduce their body's water weight to as low as possible and then replenish it as much as possible in the 24-hour period between the weigh-in and actual fight. Now, by no means am I saying that James Harden has been using any of these methods for appearing drastically different in a matter of days, but I think it's an interesting possible answer if you think this was done naturally. Now, the fun one that everyone is talking about in the title of the video is the possibility that Harden never was as heavy as he appeared and was wearing a fat suit. One of the craziest NBA theories I've ever seen. This is a question that's been all over social media over the last few days. Now, this seems extreme, but I actually think it's an interesting possibility solely due to when these photos were taken. Everyone is citing these photos of how he looked in the pregame, not necessarily how he looked in game. These warm-ups he's pictured in are sleeved, meaning that he could have been adding some kind of fake weight during the pregame while the cameras were on with the intention for his weight to become a national story, hopefully reducing his trade value, making it easier for contenders like Brooklyn, Philly, Miami, and Milwaukee to get a deal done with Houston. This is interesting, as in this scenario, it gives him the possibility to get the suit off ahead of the game. Now, I don't think it'd be easy to pull all this off between shoot around and tip off, but hey, I'm not gonna rule it out. Now, the big issue with this theory is obviously how he looked during the actual games and how he played during these games. On the season as a whole, it hasn't been quite the James Harden numbers we're used to, but if you think James Harden developed such an in-depth plan to hurt his trade value that involved a fat suit, I think you would expect him to perform much worse on the court. But in the first 3 games of the season, he averaged 37 points and 11 assists, shooting with great efficiency. The last possibility is that James Harden actually didn't do anything at all involving his weight. We've decided to take these select few images of Harden and act like that's what he looked like at every waking hour. We need to remember again that Harden has always been a heavier player for his position, something that some people argue helps his game that prioritizes getting to the free throw line. These images could purely be a product of a combination of posture, camera angle, the type of clothing. Remember, he most likely had his whole uniform under those warm-ups. As fun as it is to think about James Harden wearing a fat suit or cutting an insane amount of weight in a matter of days, I think I'm leaning to there not being any validity to these theories. At the end of the day, personally seeing with my 2 eyes, James Harden on the Rockets to start the season, and then in his recent Nets debut, where I still don't think he looked like he was in great shape, I think the crazy fat suit rumor is nothing more than just that.